Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is the largest educational event that the Epilepsy Foundation does this year. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This year, our Epilepsy Connect Symposium is presented by ASI Pharmaceuticals. We'd like to say thank you to them. We want to thank our daily sponsor today, Neurelis, for supporting our Tuesday sessions. So we will be holding all questions during this symposium session until the end. You can feel free to enter questions into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, but we will hold those until the end. So I would like to give a warm welcome to our speaker tonight, Mark Daffy. Mark was diagnosed with epilepsy in 1996. 2 weeks before his senior year in high school. Mark was overwhelmed with the life changes that he was required to make due to this diagnosis, and it took him years before he was really able to fully accept his diagnosis and find ways to thrive while living with epilepsy. Mark knows now that adjusting to life with epilepsy is what led him to become a licensed therapist and later a certified coach. Although difficult at first, he used what he learned from his epilepsy to create a purposeful life while still respecting his diagnosis. As a professional, he has spent over 15 years providing coaching, counseling, and training services to organizations of all sizes. Companies look to him to grow their employees, both professionally and personally. Mark has volunteered with the Epilepsy Foundation in various capacities over the years, and we're just really honored to have him here tonight. So let's give a warm welcome to Mark, and we'll turn it over.
Thanks, Gaitha, and hi, everybody. Thank you for your time tonight. I'm excited to be here to be speaking with you. Looking at the attendee list, I see some names that I recognize as well as some new ones. So thank you, everybody, for making it tonight. Basically, what we're going to do is just talk about mental health right now and how it's being impacted during the pandemic. And I imagine we've all felt this. I imagine we've all experienced a new normal. I can tell you that back in the spring, I was a few weeks away from giving my notice at my job and stepping out and doing my own thing. And I'm pretty glad I didn't because things are different now in the world. But my world went from that, working from home with a wife who went to an office and a son who went to daycare, to now my wife working at home, my son being at home, along with 2 other kiddos in our nanny share. So it has definitely changed the home life. I imagine all of us have similar stories in some regard. But tonight's going to be about a few things. One, we're going to look at some of the data behind mental health and COVID and how they connect and what we should be paying attention to. But we also are going to talk about how do we improve our skill set right now so we show up the way we want to and we're kind of living our best life during one of our world's worst moments. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I hope everyone likes my fancy background there. But to get us started, let's pull up the slide deck. Okay, so managing your mental health during COVID-19, that's me, Mark. And let's dive in because we know that there is a bidirectional relationship between mental health issues and epilepsy. And we're really talking about depression. So when we look at anxiety and depression, we've seen significant increases over this time in 2019. Well, I guess after the second quarter of 2019, anxiety disorders up 3-fold, depression disorders up 4-fold. I mean, we're seeing these high percentages. And it's all tied back to the uncertainty in our world right now. And that's creating more isolation and loneliness. That study showing 55% of Americans say they've experienced loneliness since social distancing began. I think that's obvious, and we can understand the impact of that. It increases our anger, our anxiety, our depression, causes problems with sleep. I mean, these are all significant things for anybody. But when we're talking about somebody living with epilepsy, these are significantly dangerous moments. And we need to realize that during this time, people could see an increase in seizure frequency as well as the severity. And it's not caused by the virus, COVID-19, but the stress related to it and the uncertainty in our world sure can exacerbate it. And you see this last bullet point here. In the 3 months following testing positive for COVID, 20% of survivors were recorded having their first diagnosis of anxiety, depression, or insomnia. And like I mentioned, it's a two-way street. It's also been shown that people with a history of mental health issues are more susceptible to contracting COVID-19. There's a 65% chance of increase for something like that to occur for somebody with a mental health diagnosis or history of. That's important because there's also that bi-directional relationship between mental health issues and epilepsy. So it's not causality, as this bottom quote mentions. It's more about common pathogenic mechanisms that operate in both conditions. And so one disorder potentially facilitates the development of the other. And you can see people with a history of depression have 4 to 7 times higher risk of developing epilepsy, along with the history of suicidal ideation, 5 times greater risk. This is all important to keep in mind because all these indicators are going up during this time. And in my day job, I'm a client executive for Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield in their behavioral health division. And across the board, this is what companies are seeing in terms of increases in why people are accessing services. It's depression, anxiety, what are called adjustment disorders, which are really just struggling to adjust with an identifiable change in your environment. And I think we could all identify the change that has occurred in our environments. And so these things are increasing across the board. What also is increasing across the board, though, and this is good news, is that people are more open to talking about mental health issues at this point. There was a Harris online poll done in July of this year that showed that more than ever, people are now open to talking about their mental health, especially suicidal ideation. That's important because previously people didn't feel as comfortable discussing these things. They also didn't feel comfortable embracing virtual care. However, virtual counseling has gone through the roof over the past 6 to 9 months, and we all, understand why. But these are good things because it's opening avenues to care, and it's opening people's ideas of what they should feel stigmatized about. They shouldn't feel like they can have to hide their mental health anymore. They're beginning to realize the importance of talking about it. And that's an opportunity to engage people that you're concerned about. The last point I'm going to make here is around stress. And 96% of people report it's increased during this time, greater than 9/11 or the Great Recession from a decade ago. As you can imagine, top drivers of stress being our health and our family's health. How do we figure out our new routine in this new world? And then the financial strain that's being put on everybody. And workers, as they go back to workplaces, whenever that occurs, they're most concerned about exposure to others in terms of getting it and taking it home to a loved one. But on the same time, being asymptomatic, I guess, and bringing it into a workplace and people not realizing it, that they're infecting others. These are the things that are driving our stress levels right now. And, I mentioned my story. Our world has been kind of turned upside down. The nanny share is here now. I'm still in the job that I've been in for 10 years, and I thought that I would be leaving. My wife's work hasn't slowed down any. And so the stress just continues to build. And oh yeah, on top of all that, you still need to manage your epilepsy and your seizures. And for me, this word stress is kind of where it all began. I remember when I was diagnosed way back in 1996, the doctor telling me, you must reduce the stress in your life as much as possible. That is imperative to your seizure kind of treatment plan. And no one ever once said, do you need help doing that? Do you know how to manage your stress? Do you understand what it's going to take to keep it at a lower level so it doesn't, cause a seizure or trigger a seizure? And I had to figure that out on my own. And as I was putting this training together, and I've heard people say it during this time, that it really is true that people living with epilepsy, if they take it seriously and if they've invested and kind of a lifestyle plan to reduce their seizure activity, then they're, they have a leg up on some people in the general public who haven't been in this situation before. It's obviously not the same. And I'm not saying people should be excited about having epilepsy. But what I'm saying is that our background and what we've been forced to do is, to some extent, at least helping me during this time, because before this time, I was required to put my stress above all else in my life. And so I've learned to do that. I have a plan to manage those things. And when this all started, I kept thinking about, a mysterious medical condition that experts can't really give full answers on. Yeah, check. That's like epilepsy. Isolation from others. Yeah, check. Feeling like they aren't going to understand or see you differently because this is an unusual diagnosis that not everyone understands or fully appreciates the severity of. Check. Yeah, we've been through all these things. And so for me, it became more of I need to assess what I do for my lifestyle plan to reduce my seizure frequency, make sure that it's working for me, and then add anything to it that I feel like needs to be added during this time as I pay attention to my stress levels. And as I thought about all this, it made me think of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the seventh habit he calls sharpen the saw. And really, it's about personal development. And you see the quote here: we must never become too busy sawing to take time to sharpen the saw. And he goes on in his book to tell a story of a man in the woods sawing down a tree, and he's sweating and grunting and clearly angry and frustrated. And he's asked, why don't you take a break to sharpen your saw? It could make the sawing easier. To which he grunts, I don't have time to sharpen my saw. I'm too busy sawing. It's like, I think we can get that way, especially during this time with COVID. There's so much going on that we will quickly push our own self-care aside because we feel like we can't focus on ourselves. There's too much going on. I would be selfish if I took a moment to recharge. That's not the case. During this time, we must stop and we must sharpen our saw. And to me, what that means is try new things, yes, but also tap into what's already worked for you. Maybe some people know what that is very well. Maybe this is the first time people are thinking about it. But when we're talking about ways to manage your stress and build your skill set, it takes time and it takes contemplation and introspection. And so what I ask is that we have 45-ish minutes left together today. And I want us to all kind of just push everything aside that might be going on, the messages you need to return or the errands you need to run or whatever you have going on. Push it to the side, because for the next 45 minutes, well, we're all going to sharpen our saws together to get better, to make sure that we're doing the best we can during this difficult time. And sometimes that means being a little selfish and focusing on ourselves, knowing that it's ultimately going to help everybody in your life. So where do we start? Where I always start, I'm a therapist and a coach. I believe greatly in the cognitive behavioral approach to both coaching and counseling. And this quote here sums it up perfectly. The meaning of things lies not in the things themselves, but in our attitude towards those things. And this is evident when you think about, not all of us need to respond the same way to the same situation. Someone might respond one way that's completely different than you. And it's in their attitude, their interpretation of those things that is the difference in there. And we can choose to see the negative. We could choose to see the positive, and both of those are good and can have their detriments. I see it as kind of on a spectrum. If all you're doing is looking for the positives and kind of sugarcoating over all the things that aren't going well, that's not helpful. But if you're only seeing the negative aspects of life and filtering out every positive, that's not helpful either. So there needs to be this balance where we are being realistic about life, but also realizing that we can change how we view things. So as I was talking about the nanny share being here and kids running around all day and yelling and screaming and how it's difficult to get work done, it is. And it's pretty amazing having them here because it's so much fun hearing their laughter. It kind of fills the house at times. And so it's in the interpretation of things. And I think we can have both. I think we can say, yeah, it's a change and there is some adjustment to it. And there are frustrating moments, but I can also see this other attitude towards it of we're not going to get this time back. My wife and I travel both, we both travel for work, and we talk quite a bit about how over the last 9 months, we probably would not have been able to see our son Boone grow the way that we have because we've been here. So again, it's how we approach things, how we approach this time that's going to make a big difference. And for me, when I work with people, I do a lot of thought work with them because when I was learning to manage my epilepsy, that's the first thing I needed to do were rein in my thoughts. All I kept thinking about was, when am I going to have another seizure? Is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? That's just playing on repeat in my mind. And I had to figure out how to coach myself to keep my thoughts moving in a positive direction. And a lot of that had to come with accepting the uncertainty in life, because when someone's diagnosed with epilepsy, what they lose is the predictability. The people who aren't diagnosed, they're able to have a little bit more of a sense of control over things. But when you're diagnosed with epilepsy, that sense of control, that predictability goes out the window. And so for me, it was being within that acceptance of there's a lot I'm not going to be able to control going forward in my life, that allowed me to gain perspective and begin to focus my thoughts on here's what I can control. And so I'm going to put my energies into X, Y, and Z. Here are the things that are beyond my control. And so I'm going to work very hard to not use waste mental energy in my mind, worrying about the things outside of my control. Whatever is going to happen is going to happen. I'm going to stay focused on what I can control and the positive aspects that I'm seeing in any situation. So I'm describing what works for me. I'm hoping that as I do this, people are thinking about how does this work for them? How can I change my perspective of certain situations? Because that's ultimately what's going to help you during this time when it comes to our thoughts and being introspective, is being able to stop and think about, how do I see my world? Is my world a positive place? Is it primarily a negative place? How are people in my world? Are people at their core level good and bad things cause them to change? Or are people inherently bad that we can't trust? I mean, all these things go into how we approach our world. And so perspective is everything. Keep that in mind as we move forward here. Resiliency, this is another one of those terms that applies to thought work. What we're talking about is the ability to keep moving forward after difficult events kick in. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But there are some certain factors associated with resiliency. That high frustration tolerance. And actually, before I dive into the list here, a few things to know about resiliency is one, that it's learned primarily, which is good, because if you feel like you don't have much resiliency, much ability to overcome difficulty, I don't like the term bounce back, because people never bounce back to the same person they were after an event has occurred. So we're bouncing forward, I guess, if we want to kind of put it in those terms. But resiliency is learned, and it's something that is not universal. If you have resiliency in one area of your life, maybe you can handle your work stress really well, you're resilient around that. It doesn't mean that it's going to immediately apply to every other aspect of your life. You need to take time and think about how you're going to be resilient in each area. And these factors are something to consider that could help you along the way. So high frustration tolerance. Are you able to tolerate those little things? And again, I bring it back to the nanny share because it gives me a lot of opportunity to practice that high frustration tolerance, being able to let things slide and realize that it's really not as important right now. Another example is that we have 2 dogs, and as hard as I've tried for 8 years now, they continue to use the restroom on my grass instead of going in the dog run next to our house. And before the pandemic, it really bothered me. But I realized that I only have so much mental energy. I needed to increase my frustration tolerance. And so I use that as an opportunity to, again, try and correct their behavior whenever possible. It's not just let them have free reign, but it's also not losing it every time I see them using the restroom on the grass. It's being able to say, hey, there are other things that need my attention. I'm I'm going to have that high frustration tolerance with this event. The ability to regulate our emotions. I mean, that's not just with resiliency, that's with anything. If you allow your emotions to dictate your thoughts and your actions, you could be heading down a really negative path at times. You need to be able to experience the emotion that is happening, observe it almost from a third person point of view. Oh, that's interesting that I'm getting angry right now. I wonder what's causing that. To be able to analyze it without reacting to it or reacting based on it. So that emotional regulation is key to so many different areas of our life. So this isn't just about COVID and our mental health. Emotional regulation helps in your workplace, all these different areas. So if you don't feel like you have good emotional regulation, start practicing that. Start being introspective of, what's causing me to feel this way? And feeling this way, does that get me the ultimate outcome I want to by it driving the actions I take? Being able to break all that down is important. Of course, being able to accept yourself is key at any time. And it's difficult to do living with epilepsy. It feels at times, especially when you're first diagnosed, like you're broken and you know you're not as worthy or as good as other people, and it's clearly not true. But you can't convince someone of this. It takes a lot of mental energy for someone to come to terms and accept who they are, and understanding that we all have limitations. And within epilepsy, there are some very defined ones that other people might not have, but it doesn't mean that they're ones that need to stop us from trying new things in life through experiences and going out there and uh, taking on challenges that we think are important. These things, that self-acceptance and that high self-efficacy play in together. Self-efficacy is basically the belief in yourself to be able to handle anything that life throws at you. So it could be a new diagnosis, it could be a new project at work, or some new problem in a relationship, but you believe in your capabilities to overcome what's coming your way. That's part of it, that belief in ourself. We talked about perspective already. Curiosity is an important one because it also helps us when we're doing things that we might not enjoy that much. But if we get curious about it, wondering why things are the way they are, and I use a lot of work examples because I work with people, employees. And so if you're working on a project that is really just more of a nuisance or anything, again, that's your perspective. But you can start getting curious about it. You can kind of turn on that cognitive piece of, well, I wonder why this is the way it is, instead of just going through the motions. And that curiosity also ties into a sense of humor. People who are curious usually are a little bit more lighthearted because they are open to the unknown. And when you're not, we're more anxious. And so that curiosity doesn't happen as much, and we aren't as lighthearted in our personality. And then the last one here, future focus. This is extremely important, not only for COVID, but for epilepsy, because so often we can get stuck in this pattern of thinking that something shouldn't have occurred, or that it's unfair that something occurred. Yeah, both can be true. It's unfair something occurred and there's no changing it and we have to move forward. Both of those are very fair statements. But if all we're doing, or if we're spending a lot of time thinking about something that we can't change, something from the past, then we're wasting precious mental energy. And at least for my epilepsy, that's when really I get the most, it becomes the most dangerous for me, is when my mental energy is just really sapped. And when I'm worrying and fretting about things from my past and that I can't control, I realize, man, I'm doing this to myself. I need to stop and make sure that I'm taking care of myself and focused on the future. Another key thing to consider is that consistent perseverance. So, like I mentioned on that last screen or the last slide, we need to be creating this ability to move forward even after setbacks and failures. It needs to be this determination that we create inside of ourselves. And again, living with epilepsy, if you've lived with it long enough, you've probably been able to create that determination, because we all have to move beyond setbacks and failures during our uh, you know living with this condition. And so these are all things that you might have already learned to do, but if not, one thing I'll say is that you just need to keep going with it. You will fail. If you're determined to move forward, there will be setbacks. There's never really anything in life that's linear. There are always, especially when we're talking about changing behaviors, there's always going to be two steps forward, one step back type of situation occurring. And I say that not to dishearten people, but to say, if you have a setback, if you fail, get back up and keep going. That optimism fueled determination makes a big difference, because again, we are telling ourselves we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what's coming our way, but we're determined to move beyond it. And we believe in ourselves that we can do that. And we accept our limitations, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to stop pushing for the things we want in life. All these create a positive mindset that are so crucial, not only during COVID, but anytime. Another concept to consider is activation energy. And activation energy is the amount of energy it takes to start an activity. And this is important because it can be used for both negative behaviors as well as positive ones. So a quick example, the reason you see the spin bike back there is because as I evaluated my kind of lifestyle plan during this time to make sure I was handling my stress appropriately, I realized I had gotten away from cycling. I love being outdoors and cycling, but I also like being on my spin bike in the basement. And with a 2-year-old, that becomes a little difficult. And I had allowed it to slip, but I knew that during this time, I needed to add it back to make sure that I was taking care of myself and doing everything I can to stay in a good headspace. And so one of the things I had to do was reduce the activation energy it took for me to get on the spin bike, because I now have to get up earlier than I normally would. And so to make sure that I don't just hit the snooze buttons, I've put my cycling shoes right next to my bed, as well as my shorts and my shirt and socks and all that. So when I hear my alarm go off, I'm not sitting there thinking, oh, I have to go to my closet and get my gear and go find my shoes, my clip-in somewhere. It's all right there. I've reduced the activation energy it takes to start that activity. And that's helped to enhance a healthy behavior. Excuse me. On the flip side, we also have the ability to reduce negative behaviors by increasing the activation energy. So Halloween came this year on a Saturday, and my wife is a nut for Halloween, so she was very upset about that. Excuse me again. And she basically purchased candy the same that she would any year. And we really didn't have anybody come to our door. In fact, we actually decided to put a sign up saying we weren't going to be handing out candy. And my wife had purchased the candy hoping that maybe things would change, being the optimist that she is. But it meant that we now have a lot of candy around the house. And in fact, that Saturday night of Halloween, I don't eat candy that much, but I ate so much that when I got up from my ride in the morning, I really could not do it because my stomach hurt so bad. So what we decided that day was that we were going to put the candy on the top shelf of our pantry and put some glass jars in front of it. So to get our candy, we now have to reach up, bring 3 glass jars down, and then get the bag of candy behind it. And that is increasing the activation energy necessary to perform a negative behavior, a negative habit. And so I give you these examples to hope that you're starting to think about, how can I use activation energy to increase positive habits and decrease those negative ones? And it could be for anything. It could be for calling a friend. It could be for cooking classes or whatever. You can do things online now. There are so many things that require different levels of energy, that if we stop and think about how we can do things more efficiently, we really can reduce negative behaviors by increasing that activation energy, and then increasing positive ones by decreasing the energy it takes to start that activity. Another thing to consider are our relationships. And Dr. George Valiant was one of the directors of the grant, or what's known as the Harvard Men's Study. And he's quoted, you can see here, as, "Our relationships with others matter, and matter more than anything else in this world." And what the Harvard Men's Study is a study that began in the 30s. And they began looking at men from Harvard, undergrads, trying to figure out what determines who has a happy, successful life. And when they first started, and they started collecting all this data, which, by the way, it's still going on. So, I mean, we have now 90 years of data that they have now begun examining family members from the original participants. So it's expanding from there. And then uh, I think in the 60s, they expanded beyond Harvard as well to inner cities of Boston, measuring men there. And so what they have been focused on at first in the 30s were things like someone's genetics or their IQ or their physical disposition. They assumed these are the things that lead people to happy, successful lives. And Dr. Valiant was the second director. He came on in 72. And he was the first one who realized that it had nothing to do with those medical pieces. It had to do with how people are reporting their relationships with others. High levels of uh, feelings of connection to others also equated to people feeling successful in their life and feeling happy, because again, success is subjective. We're defining it for ourselves. Happiness is subjective. We are defining it for ourselves, kind of like loneliness. People can be lonely in a room full of others, or people can be completely happy all by themselves. It's subjective. But what we've noticed, or what has been determined, is that that connection with other people makes us feel happier. And a lot of times success revolves around happiness. And a lot of time, and we often think that's the other way around. We often think that, oh, we must hit a certain level of happiness, or we must get a new car, or get the right job, or have the right significant other, or whatever, then we'll be happy. No, actually the other way is true too, or is true. Our happiness increases, and then our success does. So everything comes back to relationships creating happiness, happiness connecting to success. And this is across the board. They factor out all these different other demographics, and it's incredible to think that we talk so much about our diet and our physical health and all these other things, but how often do we really talk about our relationships and what we're doing to nurture them and invest in them? Often when we have a lot going on, or at least when I do, that's the first thing that falls off my plate. And it's unfair to them and to me, because I'm basically taking our relationship for granted. It's one of those, oh, they'll understand because we're so close, and I have to get this work done, or Boone has stuff to do, or just it's a hectic time, so I'll catch up with them later. That's not what we need to be doing. We need to be factoring into our lifestyle plans. How do we stay connected to others, whether it's FaceTiming with them, or finding ways to be outside and doing it safely, social distancing. But if you do not have relationships in your plan right now to take care of yourself, you need to start thinking about that. It is vital. And according to Dr. Valiant, it matters more than anything else in this world. Another key component is helping others. And this is one of those selfish acts that we like to joke about, because it makes us happy, and we can stay happy for days after the event. So just reminding ourselves that this act occurred can boost our happiness levels for days afterwards. And of course, you're helping someone else. So it's going to make them happy, hopefully. But it's that selfish part of helping others that I guess I'm focused on right now, because that's always been a large part of my plan. I'd learned it really in college, my senior year, when I saw this volunteering opportunity with the Lubbock Rape Crisis Center. And for whatever reason, I just thought that would be something I wanted to do. And it allowed me for a little bit of time to stop thinking about my own stuff. I had been diagnosed just a couple years prior. I was still in my head quite a bit about it, but being able to just put all that aside and focus on someone else who was struggling and hurting, it made a big difference to me. It made me feel good that I was tapped into something greater than myself. And you can see that it has physical benefits as well, in terms of lowering blood pressure, helping with that chronic pain. That sense of purpose is vital to us feeling like we're living a healthy, happy life. And then, of course, our longevity to it. Volunteering, there are so many opportunities through FCO that you can look at. I know there's the mentor program or the peer support program going on right now, and they're looking at volunteers to reach out to others. And there are so many ways that, even though we're pushed inside more right now, or I guess isolated more right now, that doesn't mean that volunteering isn't happening. And you can still find ways to help. And that's not only going to help you, but it's going to help your kids. Research has shown that it helps create a foundation of empathy and compassion that only plays out and becomes greater through their life, because they begin to see where they fit in the fabric of our society by volunteering and helping others. And this is all crucial for anyone's development. But again, right now during COVID, it's even more important to think of, how can I add this to my life right now? And it might not be volunteering. It might just be keeping your eyes peeled for moments to be kind to others, holding a door open, doing something, but just keeping our head on a swivel, as my football coach in high school would say, but keeping it on a swivel, looking for ways that we can support others and just make it part of our personality, because you're going to continually get those jolts of good feelings every time you help someone. So just make it part of who you are. I want to constantly be looking out for how I can maybe help somebody else. We have a lot of people out there who not only attendees are living with epilepsy, but we have caregivers. And sometimes they're both. Sometimes people living with epilepsy are caregiving for maybe children, elderly parents, whatever. And we need to talk about compassion fatigue, because it is real. And when people begin experiencing compassion fatigue, they're almost beating themselves up. How can I be feeling this way? What is wrong with me? Am I, going crazy? How can I not feel connected, compassion for this individual? And it's because we're not taking care of ourselves. We're not even acknowledging that this fatigue is happening. And you can see how it can go into things like hopelessness, or decreasing our interest and pleasure in activities that we normally enjoy, that stress and anxiety increasing, sleeplessness or nightmares, this pervasive negative attitude, this feeling of guilt that we have because we're now feeling this lessening of compassion. It can really weigh on somebody, and it needs to be acknowledged. That's the only way that you're really going to be able to combat compassion fatigue, is being able to say, yeah, I'm struggling right now, and I need to focus on myself so I can help other people. So some symptoms to consider, to think about as uh, you're questioning if you're struggling with compassion fatigue. Bottling up your emotions. I know, blaming, but I wanted to jump to bottling up your emotions, because this happens so often. People feel like, well, I'm the caregiver. I'm not allowed to express how I'm doing. It could really bother the other person. It could be unfair. Bottling up your emotions is only going to lead down that path of compassion fatigue. And so again, that emotional regulation is important, because I'm not saying go the complete opposite, and instead of bottling them up, just, yell them out whatever you want. No, again, it's on a spectrum, So we can't bottle them up. We can't just act on them however we want. We need to have that emotional regulation to say, yeah, this is bothering me and I need to do something about it. Excuse me. We can also begin feeling that lack of emotion, that numbness. We need to make sure that our highs are feeling high, our lows maybe feeling low. And I know that sounds weird, but we want to make sure that we can experience both pleasure and that displeasure, because if it's always just blah, it just, even keel, then we're never going to be able to be introspective, to be able to determine for ourselves what our different emotions feel like. And so we need to be able to experience not only the good, but the bad. You can see some of the other ones here: sleep troubles, colds, stomach problems, poor self-care. Just make sure that if any of these are resonating for you, you're thinking about what you can do to combat them. And a lot of times that might mean reaching out and asking for help, maybe from a mental health perspective, like with a counselor. Maybe that's needed. Maybe it's just reaching out to family and friends and saying, I'm caregiving right now and I like doing it, but I'm really struggling and I need some help. And maybe it's not even a long-term thing, but just right now I could use an extra set of hands. We need to feel comfortable reaching out to the people who say, I want to help, and reaching out and asking them for help, and not feeling like it's a negative on us or that we're weak because we can't handle it all. So what I always tell caregivers is to remember the oxygen mask theory. So basically, when we're on an airplane with a small child, we always hear during that announcement to put the mask on ourselves first and then onto the small child, basically because if we are unconscious and unable to do anything, then we're no help to that child next to us. It's the same concept here. Be selfish, take care of yourself. Again, that doesn't mean neglect the responsibilities that you have, but find the things that you need to do to maintain, to keep moving forward, to sharpen your saw so that you can be there the way that you want to, because COVID-19 will be behind us. This world will move on from it. And what I keep thinking about is, when I look back at myself during this time, am I going to be proud for how I showed up? Am I going to be happy with what I did to adjust to my new normal, knowing that it wasn't easy? Excuse me very much. I hope that's not bothering people too much. It is a little awkward talking and not having an audience to see. So I hope everybody got something from this. I'm wrapping up now and happy to take any questions that people might have. But my final thought is just, please take care of yourself during this time. If you're living with epilepsy, I imagine you already understand the importance of self-care. If you're caregiving for someone, please make your own health a priority, because people living with epilepsy depend on those around them so much. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself so you can be there for the people in your life living with epilepsy. So I'm going to pause now because I know we have some questions coming in, but Wendy, didn't know how you wanted to do this, I guess.
Mark, thank you so much. That was a lot of great information and some good advice for folks. I will go ahead and ask a couple of the questions that folks have written in. The first question is, how long did it take for you to find out how to effectively manage your epilepsy after you were diagnosed? And this is a two-part question. The second part is, then who helped you get to the point that you are at today?
Good questions. And I forgot to mention earlier that my parents are on the line tonight. So hi, Mom and Dad. I think some of this might be new to you. Not exactly sure, but it took me a while to get my seizures under control, as well as my acceptance of being diagnosed with epilepsy. Wrap my head around that. There were times where both my senior year and in college, I had seizures that my parents didn't know about, because I knew that started the clock over on the 6 months of giving up my license. And so there was this trying to manage it on my own and trying to remember what to tell the neurologist and what not to tell them, because I had this mindset that I could still control it. I was still in control of my world. And that obviously is a fallacy. It never was the case. I never had control. I just got lucky a lot of times that I didn't do something stupid, knowing that I was still struggling with seizures. It took a while to get the right medication as well as the right dosage down. I have tonic-clonic seizures, or back then grand mal seizures, that later evolved into some generalized kind of focal type seizures. But uh, for the most part, I think I can't point to one person saying this individual helped me come to terms with it. I mentioned at my first neurologist appointment where they diagnosed me, they said reduce your stress, but they never said, how to do that. And I don't remember anybody even saying, hey, maybe you should talk to a counselor. But to be honest, I'm not sure if I even would have back then. I was in such denial that this had happened. I assumed the doctors were wrong because it was so sporadic and at times infrequent. But what I learned is that the first hint that things were getting better was that I started volunteering more and realizing that helping others helped me. And then that kind of coaching on my own. And by my sophomore year of college, I had switched majors from accounting to psychology. And as I started learning in these psychology classes, all these different kind of cognitive behavioral techniques, I realized these are all the things that I've been doing just with myself that evidently are actual kind of clinical ways to treat people struggling with different mental health issues. And so I think a lot of it came from my schooling, because also when I got my master's in counseling psychology, you're basically going through counseling as well yourself, because you need to understand what it's like coming from the client point of view. So I believe that did help me find some acceptance in that this is my new normal and that I'm okay with this career path I'm now going down. Because before that, I wanted to go into law enforcement. That was my kind of dream and my focus. And obviously, um, that would not have been a good idea for someone who has seizures. So when I went to graduate school, it was kind of the first realization that I am taking steps in this new path. And it allowed me to explore with people that I trusted, people in my cohort who were studying to become counselors as well, to explore what took me so long to accept it and what ultimately allowed me to accept it. And that was finding a new path that really energized me, that played into my lifestyle plan of wanting to counsel and help others through difficult moments, knowing what it took for me to get through this difficult moment. And since graduate school, I've been very fortunate and grateful that it has stabilized more. And I had to switch medications about 5 years ago because I'd been on Dilantin forever, and I was getting to the point where it could have had permanent long-term effects. So there are still times in my life where it's very concerning, and every day I feel the little eye movement that Dr. Strom, my prior neurologist, said is indicative of your medication working, because that would have been a seizure. And that little rapid eye movement is just kind of the indicator that things are okay and your medication's working. And so it feels good knowing that all those are in place and working well. That's if that weren't the case, I would be in a different headspace, I'd admit. And so I do feel very fortunate that I'm now controlled to the point where I'm able to do things that maybe not everybody living with epilepsy can do. So sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but I hope that helps or got close to answering it.
No, that was great, Mark. Thank you so much. We have had a lot of folks just writing in saying thank you. So I think you're hitting the mark for a lot of folks. Appreciate it, Mark. We did have one person ask a question that I can just respond to here. How can a person living with epilepsy or a family member get in touch with the Epilepsy Foundation to inquire about resources? You can call 303-377-9774. or you can email Wendy, who's the community outreach manager. And Wendy's email at the Epilepsy Foundation is caremanager@epilepsycolorado.org. So just wanted to put that information out there. I wonder, Mark, if you could tell us a little bit about Project Uplift and the benefits of that program.
Never heard of it. Just kidding. Uh, Project Uplift is an 8-week mindfulness and cognitive behavioral class that the foundation has been providing since 2014. And I have been able to co-facilitate it each time with a staff member from EFCO. And really the entire focus is on teaching people a combination of in the moment techniques. So if you feel your stress level, really shooting through the roof, what do you do? What do you begin kind of working on to reduce that stress level? So you learn some guided meditations, things that you can apply right then. But it's also a lot of cognitive behavioral skills like we talked about tonight. So you can get yourself in a better mindset or headspace. So you might not be exerting that mental energy that can increase seizure activity. And so it really is a lot of skills that if people are struggling to control their epilepsy or don't feel like they have a good lifestyle plan, on top of the medications they take and everything, this could be a good class for you. It's 8 weeks. It's an hour each time, and really the hour is where we come together, we teach new concepts, and then we have people go out and live their lives but apply these concepts on a daily or every few days to see how it's working for them. Not every single thing within Uplift is going to resonate with every member or participant, but the point is to just lay out a number of different tools and techniques that you can use for both mindfulness and cognitive behavioral to see what works for you and what sticks for you. And there's also an opportunity to create community where people, as they share how their past week went, where they might be keeping a thought log and determining, well, how did my thought impact my actions there? And as they're sharing what they collected in their log that week, it's an opportunity for other people within the class to comment on, that happens to me too, and here's what I do, or that sounds like it was a really stressful week. I'm sorry to hear that. And so on top of the education, there is a community component that you can't replicate because it's all individuals living with epilepsy in there sharing their stories of how they manage and how they get the most out of their life.
Thank you, Mark. I can say that as a nurse who does not have epilepsy, I have actually taken the Uplift class to just learn more about sometimes what my patients are going through. And it's a really great resource for sure. We're just getting tons of thank yous and thanks for sharing your experiences and your journey. I want to ask one more question. I think a lot of people are often shy when it comes to talking about mental health issues. Do you know of any organizations or any lines that people can call or reach out to if they need somebody to talk to and are a little bit shy?
Yeah. Obviously EFCO has a number of great resources, but there's a national suicide hotline that is crucial. As you can imagine, it has gone through the roof during this time in terms of taking calls from people. There's also Colorado Crisis Services, and I hate that I can't tell you their phone number off the top of my head, but they are based, they used to be Metro Crisis Services, but they've expanded out beyond the Denver area to now Colorado Crisis Services. And just like the name entails, they're available 24/7 as well. They always have licensed clinician staff. I actually worked there for a few months, like 10 years ago. And I can tell you that it's a great organization. When you don't know where to turn, they can provide resources for you 24/7 regarding kind of anything mental health related. But like I mentioned, the foundation is there as well for epilepsy specific resources, including that preferred provider network where we have recruited providers from throughout the state. We've trained them on how to work with people living with epilepsy. And so if you are someone with living with epilepsy and you've contemplated trying counseling, this could be a great opportunity, and a great way to do that is by contacting the foundation, because they will also supplement the cost of, I believe, up to the first 8 sessions to help it be more affordable for individuals to access that counseling. So remember the foundation, and then Colorado Crisis Services, and also the National Suicide Hotline. And you can Google those two things. I unfortunately don't have the information right in front of me.
Thank you, Mark. A couple other questions. Someone asked about when this will be available to view or review. We do have volunteers at the Epilepsy Foundation, since this is being recorded, who are working on those. It may be as much as 2 weeks from now, but you certainly will be able to view this again. Someone is asking, Mark, how do your children, or does your child, deal with your epilepsy? How do they understand it? How did you explain it to them?
Great questions that I haven't had to tackle yet. My son's 2 years old, and so we're still more talking about hops and trains. But it's a good question that I'm not exactly sure how to answer, because there have been moments where I've basically had to tell my wife, Nicole, hey, I need to go lay down. I need to check out, and I'm sorry, I need to do it immediately. And that's usually the thing that will help me move beyond an episode, is just going and getting some sleep. And so there will be moments, I know, in his life that I will need to disappear, and he won't understand why. And I will need to explain to him that there is a condition that mommy doesn't have and he doesn't have, but dad must respect and work through. So I don't know how to have that conversation yet. When I do have it, I guess what I want to stay focused on is answering his questions, making sure he knows that it's nothing that I could do or that he could do to change it, and that it's nothing to be scared of. It just means that I have to be more cautious of how I approach my day, and more thoughtful and methodical with how I use my energy. But I still have a little bit more time to think through that, but those are my initial thoughts of what I'd want to get across if I did have that conversation tonight with him.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. I just want to thank you again so much for volunteering your time to be with us tonight. I want to say thank you again to Eisai Pharmaceuticals and to Neurelis. I hope we got to all of your questions, but if you do have further questions or didn't ask the burning question that you have, please feel free, again, to reach out to the Epilepsy Foundation of Colorado. They're so great. They really want to help you guys. Phone number 303-377-9774, or you can email Wendy, the Community Outreach Manager, at caremanager@epilepsycolorado.org. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we will end here. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, and I hope everyone has a good evening and stay safe.
Stay safe. Take care. Thank you.